Welcome, everybody. We're going to start. First things first, if you'd please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. And I don't know who from the clerk's office, since we've got a whole troika. Let's do the roll call first and then welcome our new commissioner.
Commissioner Nunez. Present. Commissioner Rowinski.
Present.
Chair Robbins.
Here.
Commissioner Reyes.
Here.
And Commissioner St. Clair.
Here.
Great. Thank you. And I'd like to welcome our newest commissioner, Jackie Nunez. Welcome to the dais, and we're glad to have you with us.
Thank you. I'm very excited to be here.
That's great. First item, the consent calendar is the minutes of the last meeting, the April 10th meeting. Anybody have any questions or comments on those?
I'll move approval.
Hearing none, I've got a motion. Do I hear a second?
I second.
And a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. None opposed. They pass 4-1 since Commissioner Nunez was not at that meeting. Doesn't get to vote on that. That will change shortly. Next is public comment, and this is a public comment on items that are not on the agenda, for which we will not be able to take action because they've not been agendized. But is there anybody who has any, do we have any speaker slips for subjects that are not on the agenda?
Yes, I do. Carol Steinfeld.
Carol Steinfeld, welcome.
Hi, I've been here before and I've been emailing you. I think our city really needs a working group to address water. And at the study session on Monday, we heard from Water and Bosca, but it's a reminder that the way we get our water is really like the way we got our energy via PG&E. We have no say in its sourcing, and we're paying for it to be conveyed to us. Oh. We don't have anything like Peninsula Clean Water. San Mateo is disconnected from its water supply, and again, we have no say in our water provision. We could go to Bosca meetings, but that's like an industry group more than an agency. SFPUC's own SF Water does more water demand management than we do, and some of what they do actually costs them nothing except for the city contact person. The SFPUC supplied water from the Sierras via the Delta is in the middle of a political battle. Bosca has issued a lawsuit, has sued the state over its ability, simply put, to take more water out of the Delta. And I feel that doesn't reflect our values, especially as it relates to sustainability. And especially given that there's really not a lot of water demand management that's as advanced as it could be, especially for an arid state. Last week, the state required all state agencies to form water resilience plans with diversified water supplies, and Bosca is looking at freshwater sources and like the most expensive type of reuse, which is potable reuse. And there's many more ways we can manage our water here in between that. And remember that last year, the state issued a per capita target of 55 gallons per day for indoor use. It's actually very conservative. That's the design flow for a septic system. So that's considered to be actually pretty conservative, or that takes into account the long showers, a non-conserving household. Our level is 86 GPD, and that includes outdoor use, and that tells us that a lot of water is being used for outdoor irrigation. So I think that's where we can target the low-hanging fruit on this one. So again, Bosca does not have an elected official from San Mateo as a member. Rick Bonilla has asked. And our new wastewater treatment plant is an example of something that is very reactive. So it's great that we're doing it. I understand how we got there. But years ago, we should have been addressing this issue. And I think we may have slightly different destination on that one. So I hope that the commission will perhaps address water demand and water management maybe quarterly or twice a year, but I think it needs to be systematized here in San Mateo. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And I do note on our crystal ball, the Clean Water Program update it's not yet scheduled, but it is something we will be turning to, and hope to have you back at that time. Thank you. Any other speakers?
Yes, Carol Wilhelmi.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Carol Wilhelmi, a San Mateo resident. On bicycle infrastructure, the city's Public Works Department should consider creating an official bicycle pedestrian coordinator position to work with Public Works, along with an advisory committee on all new projects. Among other things, this person would advocate for including bike lanes on new roads, providing alternate routes for bikes during construction that blocks roads, installing traffic light sensors that can sense bikes, providing secure bicycle parking in business areas, prompt cleanup of bike hazards such as gravel and debris on the roads, and development of safe bikeways to traverse the entire county. This person would identify funding sources for bicycle and pedestrian projects and prepare grant requests. The person would also work with the county, other cities, and local bike advocacy groups. On sustainability, my issue is about gas-powered landscape equipment. Noise is the top complaint about this equipment. There are significant negative health impacts and quality of life issues resulting from particulate matter and noise from leaf blowers. But since San Mateo is updating its climate action plan, let's focus on the emissions from this equipment. The California Air Resources Board predicts that total smog-forming emissions from small engines will exceed those from passenger cars in 2020. So what can San Mateo do? San Mateo can run marketing campaigns, including on social media platforms such as Nextdoor, to promote clean air gardening. San Mateo can partner with organizations such as Bay Area Air Quality Management District, Peninsula Clean Energy, and other groups of concerned citizens working on climate action. San Mateo can promote noise-free neighborhoods in which rakes and brooms are used instead of leaf blowers. That will also have the positive effect of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Better yet, San Mateo can act now to eliminate the toxic air pollution, emissions, particulates, and harmful noise pollution caused by leaf blowers throughout the city. These machines serve no great purpose, and it's long past time we put an end to their negative health and environmental impacts. San Mateo failed to ban these things in 2012. Please protect public health, environmental quality, and the well-being of the community. Let's show some progress on San Mateo's climate action plan. Banning gas-powered leaf blowers now is low-hanging fruit, big bang for the buck.
Thank you very much.
That's all I have.
Okay. Thank you. On to new business. First item is the 25th Avenue grade separation project, and we are to receive an update.
Yeah, Chair Robbins, tonight I have Raphael Bolin with Caltrain. Raphael is the main lead project manager on this project. It's a very complex project, doing a great job for us. And so he's here to update you about the project. I think many of you know about the project. Basically, we're grade separating 3 streets, 25th, 28th, and 31st. Of course, 28th and 31st have never existed before, but once the project's done, we'll have new connections east-west from El Camino to Delaware. Raphael?
Thank you. So as Brad said, this is a project that we're working on right now. So I'm just going to describe the project, a little bit of why we're doing it, and then kind of focus on some shots of the future station when it's completed. And then a brief update on where we are on the construction. The schedule's slipped a little bit, so we want to just update everybody. And then one item that we want to focus on moving towards the end of this year is during the construction phase, there will be a one-time temporary closure of the existing Hillsdale station while we build a new one. And then I'll just tell you about what we're doing about that, how we're outreaching the community, and take any questions you might So as Brad described, this grade SEP is a little over a mile long from essentially Hillsdale over to 92. And it includes 25th Avenue, which, as you know, is an at-grade crossing today. It also includes two other crossings that are not there today, one each at 28th and 31st Avenue. In addition to those three streets that you see, there's a ped and bike viaduct structure. And then there's one other bridge, which is just really over a creek. And those 5 structures are sort of the bridges I'll be talking about. The rest of it is going to be MSC wall, or mechanically stabilized earth wall, in between those structures. And in addition, as I mentioned, we are building a new Hillsdale station as part of this construction. So that's sort of the what of the project. The why is first and foremost safety improvement. So anytime you have trains, bikes, and people in the same physical space, there's a potential for problems. 25th was near the top of the PUC list of, well, in this case, lowest, I guess would be the way to say it, rated crossings. And so we're doing this to improve safety. In addition, by adding these 2 extra crossings, we are improving east-west connectivity. As you guys probably know, if you ride 25th, it's difficult in the morning and PM peaks. In addition to just a lot of traffic going through there now with the development on the other side at Bay Meadows, you've got everyone trying to get around El Camino to get onto the freeway, and it's just very, very busy. So by adding these 2 new connected streets, we hope to distribute that traffic flow a little bit better. In addition, we are, as I said, creating a new station, so there'll be new amenities, new improved customer service experience. And then this project is in one way supporting the larger effort of Caltrain electrification. So as you're probably aware, we're busy electrifying our entire corridor. And when we first came up with this project, one of the questions from the city was, can we get it in now before we electrify? And the answer was no. And then we looked at the cost of doing it after electrification, and it was just prohibitive because we'd have to look at, an electrified shoe fly and all these additional costs. So in this case, what we're doing is we're building it during the time frame of electrification. We're going to build the foundations, but not the poles and wires, and electrification will catch up once we've got those foundations in place. So that's sort of the tie-in that you see there. So here's some shots of what the future grade separation will look like. So I mentioned the where in space. I guess I didn't mention it longitudinally. So it's being built immediately to the west of the existing Caltrain tracks. All but one of those parcels are on our current right-of-way. So essentially what we're doing is we've moved the tracks to the west of the existing tracks. We're running on the current tracks today, and at the end of the year, we're going to swing track over and start elevating the rail. So we've got, as I said, partially elevated rail, partially lowered roads. The how much depends on where you're at. So at 25th, the rail is sort of doing the lion's share of the work, and 25th is only getting lowered about 3 feet at the max sag. So this is pretty close to what you see out there today. You've got the lumberyard and the dollar store. So this is sort of not that much different than what you see other than the grade SEP. 28th is sort of a hybrid where the road is getting lowered more, but the grade SEP is still higher there. In addition, what you see at 28th is the access to the station. So there's 2 main accesses to the station. It's a centerboard platform. It's elevated, so it's a little bit like Belmont minus the elevators. And the access points are 1 each ramp and staircase at 28th, and then at the Ped Underpass that I'll show you later. So then finally, 31st, this is one where the road is really getting sagged. And again, this is because we're coming off of Hillsdale, and the railroad obviously can't go up very quickly. And so it's only going up at a 1% grade, and therefore the road has to do most of the work in this image. So what you see different from the other crossings is the sidewalk and the road are at different grade. So Jefferson and Redwood would be an example where that exists, and that's because the road can go down quicker than the sidewalk owing to ADA constraints. So just to be clear, wall, sidewalk, wall, road. And then you can see some of the parking off on the opposite side. So here's another shot, shows you more of the parking. So in addition to moving the tracks over to the west, we're taking the parking that's currently on the west and moving it over to the east where our tracks used to be. So there's about 420 spots that we're building on this side, and we're keeping some of the existing up by Hillsdale as well. This is the other side of the station, so you can see the second ramp and the staircase I mentioned, and this is, again, you'd be sort of floating above Hillsdale in this shot. And here's a shot of the underpass that I described. So it's sort of a little bit of an assembly area, bike and pedestrian, and then you've got the staircase and the ramp as before. I mentioned bikes. So how do you get there if you're not driving a car? The good news is there's several access ways. So the main bike throughway would be up Delaware, and then we're enhancing bike access along 28th and 31st. In addition, we've worked with the developer over at Bay Meadows, and they're providing ped and bike, but not vehicular access through 29th and 30th as well to the station. And then the station access is all along the parking on this side. Again, one each access at 28th and on the underpass. Oops, sorry. This is some of the artwork that so this is sort of like a cross-section view, if you will. A little bit of the artwork and a sort of marquee sign that we're putting in there to sort of be kind of a focal point to the Hillsdale station. And this is, again, a concept, but you can see sort of a little bit of the look. So we went with sort of a more modern take on the finish as well as the colors, and then reverse battered walls and staircases just sort of add some accent to it. So this is coming out of the underpass. And this is a platform level shot. These are custom shelters. The color palettes and the textures and what have you were mostly borrowed from the adjacent development to try to blend into what's going on the Bay Meadows side. And so we were trying to sort of harmonize between a more classic look on El Camino versus a more modern look, and we went with the more modern side. So some of the furnishings, the lights are consistent with what's there now. The only difference is we're using LED because the technology's improved since they did Bay Meadows. So these are the timelines on the kind of the big picture schedule items, and then I'm going to show you a couple of shots of what we're doing right now in the field. So I mentioned the MSE wall, the mechanically stabilized earth wall. It's actually not mechanically stabilized earth, to be technically correct. We're using a lightweight fill. I'll show you a picture of that later, but in concept, it is an MSE wall, and that work is ongoing now. So we've basically built everything north of 25th, and we're working on the section between 28th and 25th as we speak. And we're also working on the bridges kind of simultaneous with that. So it's bridges and walls all culminating in track work starting this fall. Then there's what I refer to as the track cutovers, which, just to be clear, what that looks like is I can build almost all the new track alignment and continue to run on the existing rail. But at some point, you got to conform into the existing, and that's what I'm calling a cutover. So there will be a weekend, starting Friday night, going through to Monday morning, 4:30 in the morning, where we'll take some track, we'll pick it up, and we'll shift about 1,200 feet of track on one side, 1,500 on the other. And at the end of that weekend, if you're going north, you're going to be still at grade. If you're coming back from San Francisco, you're going to be elevated on the new grade set. And then there'll be a second cutover that happens in March where everything will come up top. And from there on, it'll be a grade sept structure. As soon as we do that work, that's when we start building the new station. And there's a 6-month clock that starts from that point where we have had to close Hillsdale. I'm going to go into that in a little bit more detail. But essentially, that 6 months lets us complete the station, build 28th, and the parking for the new station in time to open a brand new station. And then this is sort of when the streets come back online. So we're prioritizing building 28th so that it allows us to access the station, but also so that when we temporarily close 25th, we haven't landlocked that side of the right-of-way. So it's a deliberate effort to get that done first. And then the last thing pretty much we're going to complete is the 31st connection, do a little bit of landscaping, cleanup, et cetera, and then go home. So here's just a shot of some of the construction that's been ongoing for the last year and a half. This is ancillary work related to the project. We moved 3,500 feet of PG&E pipeline. It was done by PG&E's forces right up Delaware, and this is a 24-inch gas line, just one of the many utilities that had to be impacted as part of this project. And here's the MSE wall that I talked about before, and I mentioned it's lightweight, so you can see the individual is we're not bringing in truck after truck load of dirt. We're actually just using this essentially highly air-entrained cement fill. And it comes out controlled density at about 20 to 25 pounds per cubic foot. So, I mean, almost a little over a third the weight of water. So, I mean, you can see the guy with a 4-inch hose. I mean, he's not the strongest man in the world. He's just, it's just very light material coming out of that. So this is the MSE wall that I mentioned on the north end coming over. This is one of the 5 structures. This is the Creek Bridge. And then here's one of the other bridges on the southern side of the project. Station closure. So I mentioned that we're going to be closing Hillsdale. So this is relatively new ground for us. We don't close stations typically. However, in this particular case, we had to do it because the new station we can only complete the new station when we're cut up top, and we can only cut over when we close the old station. So we looked at ways to mitigate this, and we looked at options essentially. What could we do while the station was closed? Up to and including we explored things like temp stations, et cetera, and where we landed on was rather than move somebody a mile away and then bust them back in, it made sense to effectively move the station. So we looked at Hayward Park as an option, we looked at Belmont as an option, we looked at a combination of the 3, and I can kind of walk you through how we ended up at Belmont, but the short version of it is that Belmont will temporarily be Hillsdale for the duration of this closure. What I mean by that is that the limited service that currently accesses Hillsdale will stop at Belmont for that 6-month period. So if you drove or were dropped off at Hillsdale, we're going to ask you to drive or get dropped off at Belmont. If you biked or your final destination is Hillsdale, we're going to ask that you avail yourself of enhanced bus and shuttle service that will be servicing El Camino to ferry people from Belmont to Hillsdale or to their final destination. So here's a little bit of the why, and I can go into more detail if you're interested, but basically there were 2 reasons why Hayward Park wasn't really as good an option as Belmont. The easy one for me to explain is parking, right? Because there's significantly less parking at Hayward than there is at Belmont. The harder one to explain, which is what this drawing is meant to capture, is that it has to do with operational constraints on the entirety of the Caltrain right away. And if you guys are interested, I can walk you through sort of the why that is. But the short answer is we did look at all 3 options, and the only viable one on a system-wide delay basis was to utilize Belmont. So I mentioned during this closure, the primary method of connection will be the El Camino bus service, which will have 7-minute headways, peak hours, and half-hour off-peak on El Camino Real. The same ticket will be honored. So if you rode Caltrain, we're not going to ask that you buy another ticket. They will honor that on Samtrans buses. And unfortunately, it will impact our clients. So we will ask that you plan a little bit more time during this 6-month period, because obviously, depending where you land on the bus schedule, you could be delayed up to 7 minutes plus getting there. So please allow extra time. We apologize. Shuttles, we're working with the private shuttle carriers. We don't operate them all, but we do talk to those who do, as well as we're talking with some of the schools in the area, et cetera, to see if we can provide specialized shuttle service for just this cutover period. But short answer, this is the minimum amount of time we think we can get this cutover completed. That being said, there is a stipulation in our contract. If it gets done early, I will gladly pay the contractor the price of this to be done early and just open Hillsdale. So what are we doing to tell people about it? So we do a series of community outreach meetings. Well, apparently that's one of them, where we've gone out to the community at large. We've also targeted specific groups, homeowners associations, businesses on 25th, the schools, what have you. So for larger items, we go out and we talk to the community. Obviously, the station closure will be one of these, where we'll roll out another, we've told people it's coming, but this will be that thing we told you is coming is here. We also use mailers, social media, website. This is a new one we're starting, which is the virtual town hall, where it's going to be interactive and live on, I think YouTube, but don't quote me on that. And then, as I said, we do use mailers as well to the community when we do targeted things. So if we're going to specifically impact a thing on 25th for 2 weeks, we'll target just people who directly utilize that as well. The number one way, though, is the website. If you guys sign up for that, we do weekly updates, and it gets really specific. If you don't care, you can ignore it, but you will get up-to-dates, and I do coordinate on a weekly basis with our outreach. That's our hotline. We try to answer within 24 hours, and that's our website, which has all the updates, and that is our web page, which I believe is linked to the city site for up-to-date information on the project. So I could take any questions you might have.
Thank you very much. We do not have an action item on this, but if you don't mind standing up there, I would like to give everybody on the dais a chance to ask questions, make any comments. Start with Commissioner St. Clair.
Thank you very much. You gave a lot of information. You did real well. One of the issues there was a school over there that when that came in, the biggest problem we had was parking. And we were always sitting there saying the majority of the students were to take the train.
That's right.
What is that? Has that fallen on to Caltrans? Because where are most of those students coming from? Are they coming from Belmont to come back, or would they be coming from Hayward Park quicker to get to school?
Yeah. So the schools are one of those ones that we specifically outreach to because they obviously have particular needs. Not only is there a lot of individuals, but obviously they're younger and, safety is a concern, right? We don't want to just let people, walk where they may walk. We want to make sure there's a clear path. My understanding is the majority would probably still elect to do Belmont, and that's why we've been talking to them about some kind of shuttle that the school was looking at paying for, or at least partly subsidizing to try to make sure that happens. I don't think it's going to be 100% of the issue because it would be targeted AM and targeted PM. There's always going to be students who do after school stuff or what have you. We're also looking at, making sure that we have bike routes that are accessible during that time frame and things like that. But I think my understanding is the majority would still use the Belmont and use that shuttle or bike from Belmont.
I'd like to find out from the school and Caltrans working together, because again, the attitude of that whole project was based on students not having cars and riding the bus. Right. And a majority of those kids that were going to that school were coming from a previous school up in Hillsdale. So it would appear that they would be coming from that area down. So it would, whether it was dropping off at the earlier station by that 10 minutes or so, or being a shuttle, or if the shuttle was making a roundabout between the two, would be something I'd be like to hear about if there was something in that ballpark that you guys are discussing.
No, absolutely. And when we have fleshed out all the details, I think we would probably come back to the city with more details on that. We're still working with them. I think part of what the school wanted was the opportunity to kind of hear parents out and understand, so they're not just dictating to people. Because they'd even thrown out things like potentially moving their start of class to adjust to this. And so they're very aware it's coming and they're working with us on it. But you're right, that's a real concern we have.
And then one other, regarding signage and lights on the bike paths. Are we looking at more signage, more lighting for night, so that instead of just a bike path, that we're having lighting for that so it's safe?
Yeah. Good question. So I don't know if my little drawing goes into that kind of detail, but the access ways on the new street connections do have improved lighting and much wider sidewalks and bike lanes. So we're excited about that. As to these locations, I'm not positive. I have to get back to you on that one because those are actually privately owned. They're just allowing us to go through them. But that's a good question. I can get back to you on the private connections, but I do know we put in enhanced lighting on 28th and 31st, which are the main connections.
Thank you.
Commissioner Reyes?
Thank you. Thank you for this important work. Can we go back to the schedule, please? I was a little bit confused on the sequence of events.
Yeah. This one or the next one?
Let's see. I think, oh, no, that one's good. So the station is closed, I see. So starting December of this year through June.
Yep.
And maybe you already mentioned this, but has there been any exploration of having any dedicated shuttles to and from Hillsdale Station, where it is currently, to Belmont on peak hours?
So that is one we're looking at. I don't have a final answer for you on whether that's going to transpire. I mean, most of our shuttles are not actually operated by Samtrans or by JPB, but we are looking at that as an alternative to because we're aware that that link just got a little bit more complicated, so that is one we're looking at, yes.
And I would just note that Hillsdale is an express stop, right? And we're
Correct.
talking, this is a heavy employment center
Correct.
already. So it would really be terrific to have, at least during peak hours, some dedicated shuttle support because, Samtrans is not the same thing,
Right.
clearly.
So I am aware that the business parks shuttles that are currently using Hillsdale, we've already reached out to them, and that service will be moving. So those who access some of the businesses a little bit further east, I know they're going to just shift it temporarily to Belmont. But you're right, there was a direct route already, I believe, and I think we are looking at what it would take to resurrect that, at least for this cutover period.
Okay, that would really be terrific. And then I assume that the targeted outreach includes the Bay Meadows Homeowners Association.
Yes, very much so, yes.
Yeah. A couple other questions. Given that parking is being moved, has there been any consideration for enhancing electric vehicle readiness, for some charging and maybe future charging at the parking location?
You know what? I have not, but I'm certainly willing to look at that.
And there's obviously a huge amount of power going in there, and it would be great to electrify some percentage of those spaces, or at least have them ready for electrification. So that could take the form of conduits and some initial
Stop it out
makers.
and leave it. Yeah, okay.
Can you go back to, I think we had a schematic showing the access points.
Yeah. This one.
Right. So one point of pretty regular concern that's been raised here around the work that's been going on here in the movement of the station is the access from the Southside neighborhood. And what I'm noting here is there's significant added distance that's happening here, and I'm curious what the discussions have been, and are there any measures that are being considered to improve the Southside access?
Yeah, so you raised an important point, and I'm going to go back a couple of slides to 31st, and that's kind of why I guess I dwelled on this one for a little bit. So the issue is 31st, and it has to do with the unintended consequence of this alignment. So when you have a wall and then a sidewalk and then a wall, there's really no easy way to create access through that, if that makes sense, right? You can't have a driveway. You can't create a shortcut across 31st, if that makes sense. And so the consequence of that is you're absolutely correct that to get up 31st is really only viable through either Delaware at 31st or all the way to El Camino. So it's a real issue. I have heard the concern, and we've looked at a number of things, and I can kind of pull you aside afterwards if you like and kind of walk you through some of what we looked at. It gets kind of tricky because I think that the issue is there's no easy way over and around 31st without going around it. And so the practical thing is we looked at, well, what would it take to go up top? What would it take to go around? But there was a lot of constraints that kind of limited what we could do.
Can you go back to the visual of 31st,
Yeah.
31st intersection
Yeah.
there? So wouldn't it be possible to put some sort of pedestrian walkway that would get you from one side of 31st to the other that's actually on the elevated platform there, since you already have an elevated platform, right?
Say that one again.
And I'm speculating here because I'm not exactly clear on the intersection points here, but it would seem like since there's already an elevated platform for the train, couldn't there be some mechanism for putting an elevated walkway so that the fact that there's already a bridge over 31st to be used for pedestrian use also?
So to have somebody access on the south side and
yes, exactly.
So we did actually look at something very much like that. And again, there's kind of technical problems with that. The biggest issue has to do with, the safety issue with having a long, dark tunnel. And then there's some vertical clearance constraints that were problematic as well. But we did look at a couple of versions of that. You're right in concept. I think the practicality of it is you run up against some really tight constraints on how big that walkway can be coming around and what vertical clearance you have. And the more it looks like a dark tunnel and you can't safely do it, the less it starts to make sense. But it is something that we did look at, because you're right. I mean, we're already building the grade step, right? So I mean, the infrastructure's there, and it would just be an issue of getting somebody safely up top. Right. But yeah, if you're interested, I have some. There were a number of concept level things that we did look at to try to ameliorate that, and there were just a lot of technical issues with it.
Because obviously we're taking a neighborhood that currently is transit-oriented development and making it not. And so it's really unfortunate to basically make that substantially less accessible. I mean, I think what I hear you saying is that we don't have any options based on the engineering constraints that we have.
I mean, there's always going back to how it was at Hillsdale. That's suboptimal, right? I mean, you can go up to track level and cross over there, but I do hear you. It is, unfortunately, I mean, when you move something, some people win, some people lose, right? I think what we did is, this is as far south as the station fit and still accounted for that reversing curve. So it wasn't gratuitous. We didn't move it because we wanted to. It was sort of like, we understood that we were inconveniencing a certain percentage by doing that. And then the 31st thing, to be honest with you, was an unintended consequence, right? We were really pushing the limits of making the street work with the road and the rail grades. And it was only later that we realized, oh yeah, we've just effectively made it impossible to cross at mid-block. I mean, not that mid-block crossings are great anyway, certainly not at underpasses, but it is a technical constraint that I just haven't found a way. You're right, there's an issue, and I don't really have a good answer other than to say that, yes, we have, unfortunately, you're right, made it worse for people who have historically walked from here just across the Hillsdale crossing. And I don't have a good answer for you other than we've looked at a lot of ways to try to mitigate that, and none of them have been really good.
Okay, all right, I understand. I have no further questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Rowinski.
Let's keep on this slide. And my question, and this is a question I get a lot from residents, is, and Jay might have sent you aerial map of the southern part of this project. Jay, did you? No, okay. Anyway, all right.
I believe it.
Here is one of the questions that I get, and I just want to go to the south end where Hillsdale Avenue is, and I would just state, And my question is, what's going to happen with the property? What is it going to look like, that property where the current station is now?
Yeah.
And then across the street from it, there is this other piece of Caltrain property.
Yep.
I hear from my residents who have to go up and down Hillsdale twice a day, 5 days a week. It's a bit of an eyesore, and they're hoping that Caltrain addresses this in this whole revamp. So could you shed some light on that for me?
A little bit. So just so that I'm clear, you're talking about this parcel?
Yes.
Which extends all the way back to some rentals we have?
Right.
And then this, well, I guess the remnant piece
Yeah,
here.
that whole, what is currently the, they're both parking areas.
Yeah, the back of TGI Fridays and then the other section. Yeah,
right.
No, that's right. So, so let me start with the easy part. So the tracks that are currently about a third of the way to the east, meaning more east than west on the existing right-of-way, are going to come all the way hard up against the west side. So the edge of this wall is 18 inches from the property line, and obviously less as you go out, but that's how close we get it. So you're correct that now you're going to end up with a wedge of property here that was the most valuable parking that I owned and now is not. And that will be leftover property when we're done. In addition,
And what are the plans with the leftover property?
So,
A park?
no, so the issue is it has to do with whether there's going to be a future transit use for it, right? So the current agreement by which this structure of this whole project moved forward was to not preclude potential 4 tracks in this area. That was part of the original agreement between the city, high-speed rail, and Caltrain to build it was that we wouldn't preclude that. And so the whole project was
You wouldn't
designed that way.
preclude what? I'm sorry.
The potential for 4 tracks
Right.
in this area.
Right.
Now, a lot has changed since we signed that agreement. And so I don't know how plausible that is that that's coming
So
along.
is your plan to leave a broken asphalt and whatnot behind?
No, I mean, we'll clean it up, but we have no plans to develop it at this time. We're certainly open to having that discussion because we are aware that it will be an economically non-viable wedge that no longer
Yeah, that
benefits
right.
us.
So it's going to.
But however, could be very valuable to somebody who's doing work on that side. The one exception to what I just said is this small portion here, approximately 20 spots, is going to be
No,
used.
actually, it goes fairly far south towards 37th.
No, the whole thing does. I guess the 20 spots is going to be used by electrification as one of their paralleling stations for the electrical system. So those 20 spots we are going to utilize. The rest of it is going to remain parking until we can come up with a better application for it.
Right. So do you intend to do repaving?
We're going to repave this area, correct. This area, no, we weren't going to repave.
Right. Well, maybe you can put the other area on as well. It really, actually, like I said, hearing from my residents who have to go up and down Hillsdale
Sure.
day in and day out, it really is exceedingly unattractive. I hate to say, but
Yeah.
and I think probably anybody would concur with that. And I think Caltrain, for a relatively inexpensive amount of money, could probably do something with some landscaping and
Yeah.
some parking pretty inexpensively. And really, the city shouldn't tolerate it, frankly. And that's something I do hear a lot from residents. And maybe you and I can get together and I can bring some people.
No, absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, I don't think we ever intended to leave it as rubble, but I think we were certainly open to
I'm glad to hear that.
something more valuable than just at-grade parking. I mean, right now, it's very valuable to us because this is the main drop-off area for the current station location.
Right.
But once we grade SEP, that goes from being extremely valuable to us to
Right, now it
to
becomes.
not so much.
Right, and because it becomes invaluable, it looks like, frankly, an eyesore. I'm hoping that we can get some improvements on that. Okay, and we can talk about that
Sure.
on offline.
Absolutely.
Other questions I have, let's go back to the screen with the parking. And I think it had 31st on it. Yeah, this would be fine,
Yeah.
So, do you think 420 spots is going to be enough?
So that's just, maybe I misspoke. 420 is on this side. There's going to be a total of a little bit over 520 spots for the whole station because we're keeping 110 on this side.
How many, because we're redoing 25th, 31st, a whole bit.
Yeah.
How many new parking spots will we get?
Roughly, it's the replacement number for what's there now. So it's probably about 50 more than what's there today, but it's roughly replacement value.
Right, so,
Just to be clear, I'm not counting the ones on the other side of Hillsdale that you mentioned in that total. If you do, then you're getting another 150 spaces. But I'm not counting that because it's a bit of a walk.
right. Okay, let me ask you, because, and we are the Sustainability Commission, and we will be actually talking about our climate action plan after this agenda item.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever thought about, as opposed to blacktop on your parking, to use a light top and therefore reflect sunlight as opposed to have it absorbed?
We've never used it before. I mean, we're not, I don't think, opposed to it. I mean, we're certainly.
I think, yeah,
Yeah.
right.
I mean, we've looked at a couple of things with planting and what have you to avoid that, just pure, as you were saying, black reflective surface, but we could certainly look at it, yeah.
Right, and I believe there's colorations that, and it's there
No,
for
absolutely.
it. So that might be something, because we're going to have, looking at this particular schematic, I can see a very long black row of black.
right.
And so that could possibly make sense. And then I have one more question here, and it's a little bit dovetailing off of what Commissioner Sinclair talked about, and that's regarding the bicycles.
Sure.
Can you, let me just see, just go through your slides here. Let me just see if there's one I wanted to,
I'm in a construction now.
no, not that. There was one here that caught my attention. It was also a schematic.
One of these, maybe?
Oh, yeah, there it is. If you can go back. Yeah,
This one?
there,
Okay.
yeah. No, let's go forward, because there was a very good one there. Okay, this is fine, yeah, so 31st. So up in what would be 10 o'clock my time, actually would be 10 o'clock looking as far as the audience as well.
Okay.
And this is something that was brought up. We had a city meeting here on the 28th, Bike Boulevard, back in early March. And one of the comments that came up was to ensure that bicycles, scooters, pedestrians can cross El Camino safely from 28th and into the station. And I just want to make sure, is that Caltrain's responsibility, or is that the city, or is that joint?
The crossing?
Yeah, the crossing, to ensure that they're
Yeah.
wide, they're marked.
Yeah, we're rebuilding those. So this, El Camino obviously is Caltrans, so we're working with Caltrans on that, but we will be rebuilding those crossings as part of the signalization is changing and the crosswalks.
Right, and that would provide safety for
Correct.
pedestrians, scooters, bicycles, everything.
Correct.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Mr. Nunez.
Yes. Thank you so much for your presentation. Regarding bikes, do you know what the capacity of the shuttles to accommodate bikes are?
I don't. I can find out. I don't.
Okay. Thank you.
During the temporary, you're talking about during the...
Correct.
Yeah.
And then my other question was, I might have missed this, but what will the frequency at Belmont be increased during peak times, the frequency of stops?
Yeah, so I didn't do a good job explaining that. So part of the reason Hillsdale is it's a limited service stop. We will be changing our corridor-wide service to provide that same limited service at Belmont. So I don't remember the numbers exactly, but it's about 40-something more trains will be stopping at Belmont than currently stop at Belmont. Right now, Belmont only gets local service, and Hillsdale gets bullet service. So that will temporarily get shifted to Belmont to sort of account for the regional effect of people who are driving or taking other transit to get to Hillsdale to go somewhere else.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. I've got a few. I just want to confirm, is it correct to understand that the net parking change from the current Hillsdale to the new is 0? It'll be roughly, it's a replacement, maybe a few more?
Yeah, yes, that is correct. That being said, there's still another 100 spots that I'm not counting in the new total because they're far away enough that I don't count them. So I guess you could technically say we're building 100 more, but I think the short answer to your question is yes, it's replacement parking to what's there.
Okay. You mentioned there were delays in the project.
Yes.
We saw this schedule. What the current schedule reflects how much delay from what was planned?
Approximately 10 months to the
10
whole
months.
schedule of the project.
And then the cost overrun or change, the increased cost?
We're still anticipating being within the authorized project budget. We are looking at having to go back to our board to get more change order authority to facilitate all these change orders, but we are still projecting it being within the budgeted amount.
Okay. And Raphael, you had a follow-up?
Yeah, thank you.
Sure.
Couple quick follow-ups. There is currently a pathway behind the office buildings between 31st and 28th.
Yes, that's right.
What's going to happen to that?
You're talking about this, what used to be a bike
Yes.
path.
Well, it doesn't include the parking station, but just the parking lot, excuse me, but behind the 3 office buildings. Currently, you can take a bike back there, you can walk through there, and it looks like it's actually designed as a road that cars could in theory, go back there. What's going to happen to that?
So right now, this is our temp parking that we're utilizing. But in the you're talking about the one that's on the other side, not on the Caltrain property?
That I believe it's not Caltrain property.
Yeah, so
right?
that, my understanding is that's going to remain like that, but I can confirm that.
So I'm just thinking, it would really be great if there were any way to ensure that that people could link to that and use that as a
Yeah.
walkway also? Because particularly if you're biking,
Yeah.
Delaware's not a good street to be biking on because of all the parking there. And so if that could be utilized as a pathway, particularly for folks coming from the south side, that could be quite attractive.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. We did talk about that early on, and I think it's still on the table, would be to effectively connect where, I don't know if you can see where I'm lasering, but is that what you're talking about, to connect it so you could avoid the...
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So, yeah, there's a path there was a pathway there before, and I think it wouldn't take very much for us to reestablish something, and it's something we have talked to the city about.
Right.
I think, to be honest with you, I haven't prioritized the design because it's a little ways out, but
Sure.
I think it is something we would look at in the after condition. Part of it will depend on how this gets developed in the after condition.
Right.
But I think conceptually it makes sense, instead of making somebody go up Pacific to Delaware and then back 31st just to go around a 2-block
It was
section.
substantially better, yes.
Yeah, correct. Especially since this whole area is, the Great Step is moving to the west, not to the east. So that is something we're certainly looking at, yeah.
Okay, great. And then a couple items following up on Commissioner Rowinski's comments. That we have a lot of potentially non-permeable surfaces, and capture of rainwater is becoming increasingly important. And so I'm curious about provisions both on the parking lot and potentially the upper platform for doing rainwater capture, or I should say groundwater replenishment. And that could be, by having permeable pavers on the parking lot, possibly even the entire parking lot, using pavers that could then, have spaces for water permeability, and then similarly in the water capture from the platform, that be first directed to some sort of surface, rather than straight into storm drains.
Yeah, so that isn't really captured in these drawings, but that is something we looked at. So on the surface level, so obviously this was dirt, and we've just replaced it with an impermeable grade separation. So it gets captured, you can't see, but there's asphalt under this. Mm-hmm. So it acts like almost impermeable surface. We collect the water that lands on the grade sep through a pipe. It passes through, and then on the north end of the job, it goes through a biofiltration. You can't see it, but it passes through that before it re-enters the storm system.
Okay.
Likewise, again, this isn't really visible from this, but this is all bioswale in the after.
Great.
So we're funneling it through, and then you have localized collection systems on the road that again masquerade as planters, but the same kind of concept. We're trying to capture as much as we can without just dumping it into the storm system. So unfortunately, these pictures don't do it justice, but we did look at that.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Susan, do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, actually,
Okay.
Commissioner Reyes had just answered that, because that was going to be, if we go to 28th, the other one, there was another,
This one?
31st,
Yeah.
31st. I mean, if you look at this is a sea of concrete
Yes.
and asphalt.
Yeah.
And so that was going to be my follow-up question, is the capture of the rainwater.
Yeah.
Frankly, and it would be, I can't, in the parking lot, possibly having bio basins, some trees, and offsetting as opposed to black, a beige. That might be something.
Yeah.
Well,
we're halfway there. We are doing the capture. I certainly can look at the color. That's an interesting idea. It's a pretty low-tech solution to
It is a pretty low tech, and
a
we'll,
big issue. So I agree
Right.
with you on that. And I wish this drawing better showed it, but the gap between, and I know this isn't my most beautiful slide either. You can see a lot of this is the existing Google image, but the between the sidewalk and the property line is really where a lot of those facilities are located.
right. And then what about the parking lot over on what would be 9 o'clock? Is that yours, or is that private?
This one is a weird mix. So the TGI is private, and there's a row and a half that's mine, and then there was a weird reciprocal deal where they kind of swapped off parking. But basically, it's that wedge shape that I was trying to describe before. That's
Right.
ours.
Right.
So that's why I think I understood what you meant about the leftover, because it's going to be a very odd leftover parcel.
It is
when
going
we're
to be,
done.
and I think there's probably something to do with it, and maybe we can talk offline, and some citizens that have approached me about that.
Okay.
Okay, super, thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Do we have any public comment slips on this subject?
Drew?
Okay. Thank you. May call you back up in a moment, but thanks. Cookie, how many do we have? Yeah, just
one.
Okay. Drew, howdy.
Good evening, everyone. This is the original project that brought me to city government in San Mateo and stuff. So I have a lot of passion around this project, and I've appreciated the time that like Raphael, Caltrain, and the city spent on this. So the original stuff, as Raphael said about improving stuff, there was some stuff looked. I think there probably was some options, but given the constraints and the time constraints and stuff, had it been known right up front, probably could have done something different. Now, since then, Caltrain's doing a business plan, and almost virtually every business plan version that shows the growth is possibly 4x for this. So Caltrain right now has about 60,000 riders. They're projecting in 2040 to have like 240,000 riders. And to accomplish that, they have to do some four-tracking around stations and stuff. And Hillsdale, in virtually every scenario, is four-tracked. So with that future, there are some options really long-term. That might be 20 years out to do some stuff that would essentially extend the station platform south and make 31st like a 28th kind of thing where the platform, because they need to lengthen the platforms as well, probably as part of this. That's the long-term future stuff. In the short term, I actually, because of the bicycle master plan, and just been thinking about this because of the stuff, I do think there potentially are a short-term solution and stuff to get across 31st. It would connect the bicycle path that's coming up from the police station, kind of like you were saying, Commissioner Reyes, about a direct shot and stuff. Only have about a minute, so I won't get into it. I need to meet with Caltrain staff and city staff, and it'll cost some money, but imagine there was just a pedestrian bridge over that, and that bridge could be reused somewhere else in the city later when a permanent solution got done. That bridge wouldn't cost a lot of money. A pedestrian bridge that's like 6 foot, 8 foot wide. I've seen it, they're not a big deal. And you know, there's a lot of constraints. This is all designed, it's all being built, it's all bidded, so any changes. But if there's a way to do some stuff, that increases safety. It actually also ties in this wedged parking lot that's to where the current station is. All of a sudden, those parking spaces become more valuable because you could park there, you can walk to the station much easier. And long-term, that station property on both the north and south side of Hillsdale is very valuable. That's where the forward tracking needs to go. So we need to maintain that as a possible for the long term. In the short term, there might be options, but definitely don't want to see a building built there and stuff, because that's where 4 tracks needs to go. And 4 tracks makes Hillsdale even a more valuable station. It's one of the top 10 stations on Caltrain's current system. So I could speak a lot more on this, a lot of passion. Thank you.
Thank you, Drew, and thank you, Caltrain and staff. I did want to reiterate one thing that was mentioned in all the conversation, the idea, this is a good lead into our next subject, either the infrastructure or the actual development of charging stations will go a long way to make this thing, to make it make sense for those who drive to the train to actually drive electrically. And I think that's a good lead into our next item, which, to make the name proper, is the Climate Action Plan Update, the greenhouse gas emission reduction strategies. This one we are to provide direction and feedback, which means also no vote, but we can be even more vocal than we always are. I don't think that's going to be an issue. And we'll take a 10-second pause while staff scrambles. I want to thank the public that came, knowing there's a Warriors game, there's a
All right, good evening.
Good evening, Andrea. Welcome.
I'm Andrea Chow, the Sustainability Analyst for the city. I'm here to introduce our item tonight, our Climate Action Plan update. We have two of our consultants here today, and I'll let them introduce themselves tonight. But I'm excited because we are reaching the phase now where we're talking about strategies to implement in the next updated Climate Action Plan. So it should be an exciting discussion.
Thank you, Andrea. I'm Eli Crispy with PlaceWorks. We are the prime consultant assisting the city on the update of the Climate Action Plan. With me is Sarah Moe from DNVGL, our sub-consultant who will be supporting the Climate Action Plan effort, especially on energy issues and ensuring consistency with the regional RICAPS effort. And we are here to provide you an update on our progress for the Climate Action Plan. Today, we will be reviewing the updates to the greenhouse gas reduction measures in the existing Climate Action Plan that we discussed at our meeting a couple months ago. And we will also be discussing ideas for new measures and implementation items to add into the updated CAP. Just to recap the Commission a bit on the greenhouse gas reduction levels that we are hoping to achieve. These are the draft targets that would demonstrate consistency with the targets that the state has laid out. As you can see, we are projecting the city of San Mateo to be well below the 2020 target, to be on a good trajectory to exceed the level of greenhouse gas reductions that we're hoping for in the short term. But there are those longer term 2030 and 2050 targets that current trajectory does not put the city on a path to achieve. So we are hoping that the CAP update will allow the city to reduce emissions to meet those levels. There are 28 measures in the existing Climate Action Plan. As we said last time, we will retain the measures that are still relevant, updating them as needed. The existing measures that have either been completed or are no longer viable, we propose to remove them from the Climate Action Plan. They are shown in Table 2 of the memo that you've been received. It is almost identical to the version of this table that you saw at our last presentation. There has been one change. The measure related to the Community Choice Aggregation Program was originally scheduled to be removed. We are now recommending that that be updated, and we think there's some opportunity to achieve additional reductions there. So then there are the new measures to be added in, and these are intended to be responsive to gaps that are in the existing measures, taking advantage of opportunities that may not have been available at the time the existing Climate Action Plan was developed, various technologies that didn't exist, or just opportunities that were not feasible 4 or 5 years ago when the Climate Action Plan was originally prepared. As I said, we are hoping that these will allow for additional reductions to meet the 2030 and 2050 greenhouse gas reduction targets, and they are shown in Table 1 of the memo that you've received. We will be going through them, each of those items, in additional detail. To prepare these new, what we are calling strategies, these were informed by multiple sources. There were certainly extensive conversations with city staff. We've looked at regional greenhouse gas reduction efforts. The comments that this commission has provided at past meetings were certainly taken into account and used to inform these strategies. Also, we wanted to look at the new and emerging best practices from other cities in the Bay Area and around the state, see what other communities are looking at and seeing if those might be feasible and appropriate for San Mateo. Based on all of that, we have developed 26 draft new strategies. They are organized in your memo by sector. And we're calling them strategies because they can really be treated at multiple policy levels. They can either become a new measure unto themselves, or they can serve as action items that fall into one of the existing measures. So because we wanted to provide some flexibility with how they are treated in the updated CAP, that's why you'll see that language referring to them as strategies rather than measures or action items. The new strategies that we are presenting tonight will not necessarily apply to all existing measures. Not all of them will get new language associated with them as we're presenting it. There may be minor language updates that we are not showing here that we may want to make to those existing measures, and there are further opportunities to make revisions, but just note that not every single one of the existing measures in the CAP will get new language that we are introducing here tonight. We are seeking some guidance from the Commission on the level of implementation as well as the language of the strategies. You may remember that the existing Climate Action Plan talks about a level of implementation as encourage, incentivize, or mandate. Mandates certainly provide greater certainty around how the measure is implemented. They often have greater reductions associated with them, but there's greater effort and resources required to put mandates into effect. There are incentives, which provide a medium level of reduction and certainty. The level of the reduction is linked certainly to the value of the incentive. The more you incentivize the behavior, the more likely people are to go along with it, the greater the reductions you get. And then there's always an option to encourage, which is certainly easier and takes less resources, but the greenhouse gas reductions from those items tend to be lower, and there's less certainty around them. So we are certainly open to dialing in any of the proposed new language at any of these levels. So with that, we will get into a discussion of the new strategies. We will identify whether these are being proposed as new measures or as new action items for existing measures. And I will turn it over to Sarah, who will go through the renewable energy and energy efficiency strategies for you.
Okay, thanks, Eli. So, hello, I'm Sarah Isabel Moe, and I am a senior consultant at DNVGL, and we get to talk about the new actions for the energy measures. I also have worked on the RICAPS program, so as Eli mentioned, I want to provide that consistency between some of the calculations we've done for that program over the years and for the new, specifically the electrification measures. I've also worked on the San Mateo energy and water strategy, which draft will be coming out soon. So more consistency there for you all. Okay, so diving in, you can read along, or I will walk you through each one of these. So the first slide here is on electrification. And the first new action is around electrifying municipal buildings. So this could be something that would impact and improve the adoption rate of electrification by, leading by example. And that helps, show others what's possible, get that story out there, and encourage other building owners to do the same. And it would be easiest to start with those buildings which have AC or are going to get AC, and simply switching the fossil fuel heating load over to that air source heat pump. The next thing here would be around new construction for both residential and non-res. And we're talking here about incentivizing new all-electric construction. So that's the second bullet point there. A new all-electric construction would be sort of like the Palo Alto model, where they did a % beyond code using the 2019 standard of EDR, the energy design rating. This would be really important, even though new buildings are a small percentage of your building stock, just like we saw in the green building movement, where the new construction brought, the FSC wood and other green building materials to the existing building world. That would also happen here. So the new construction policy, while it might not seem like a big deal if you're only building 14 houses a year, it actually does really also impact the supply chain for the existing building stock. Okay, and the third bullet point there is going to be around existing buildings and incentivizing electric panel upgrades. So this is something that can be quite expensive. There will be, I don't know if this is still speculative, but I think there will be some PCE incentives available. So we would like to provide some outreach around those incentives, and that will allow for people to add electric vehicles, air source heat pumps for their water and space heating as well. Next slide is on renewable energy. And this one is specifically for those direct access customers who are not already on PCE Clean Energy. And this would also be an action that would be focusing on a partnership, working with PCE and working on some sort of innovative procurement strategy for those direct access customers so they could also, cost effectively procure more clean energy. The next slide is on renewable energy as well. And this one is going to be around microgrids and batteries. So there's two actions here. The first one is talking about microgrid demonstration projects. And this is really important, as you know, also for resilience. So it would be finding the best sites to have some demonstration projects show what's possible when you connect energy assets within a certain area. And then the next action there is around, it would really be about leveraging your mandate on solar PV and pairing all solar PV systems going forward, or not necessarily mandating it, but encouraging it to go along with the battery system. That would give you both time of use benefits to really capture the value from the solar on the rooftop, as well as there'd probably be some incentives from PCE there to capture as well. Okay, now we're moving on to energy efficiency from renewable energy. So we're looking at energy efficiency for new construction, non-res here. So this would probably be focused on the mixed fuel buildings, and this will be an effort to, again, partner and coordinate with PCE on the regional effort to explore the REACH code, which we had a meeting about today. Next slide is energy efficiency again. This one's really just about providing shade trees in order to lower cooling loads. And that one's focused on residential. Next slide is on residential energy efficiency as well. And this one would be leveraging the best practice that Berkeley, which is the city I live in, has used, which is the BASO model. So building energy conservation ordinance, that would be a time of sale ordinance to encourage retrofits at the time of sale, which is a key leverage point. So that would be that one. And the last one on energy here is energy efficiency, again, around retrofits, this time for commercial and multifamily dwellings. And this is another industry best practice, which is a benchmarking program. So through the disclosure of the energy use on the building, it's not really just about the disclosure, but that would be a starting point. But it's obviously about getting the bad performers the right information and incentives they would need to improve their performance. So with that, I'll pass it back to Eli.
All right, thank you, Sarah. We'll transition to discussing about alternative fuels and alternative transportation. So the next new strategy that we are proposing would be a revision to the existing measure around public EV chargers. As Sarah mentioned, a lot of the building stock in San Mateo is existing buildings. We want to make sure that people in those buildings also have greater availability and means to support driving an electric vehicle. So we would want to encourage the expansion of EV charging infrastructure in existing buildings, both residential and non-residential. We also want to explore mandates to EV charging infrastructure in new buildings, again, both residential and commercial, and that would go beyond what the state currently requires for the EV supportive infrastructure in new buildings. There's an existing measure on EV adoption. EV adoption in San Mateo and in this region has been pretty brisk, and it's expected to continue to increase. But we certainly want to encourage the city to do its part and to lead by example. So we are proposing a new action item that would increase procurement of electric vehicle or other clean energy vehicles in San Mateo's own municipal fleet. We want to support transit-oriented development. So we want to look at efforts to increase transit-oriented development along the El Camino Real corridor and near the Caltrain stations, And this would be something I think that would be done in conjunction with the general plan, which the city is currently in the process of updating, making sure that there is a close linkage between any transit-oriented development strategies in the climate action plan and any land use policies that would be part of the general plan update. We would recommend improvements to the public transit service to the extent possible, partnering with Caltrain and Samtrans. We want to support new bus rapid transit routes that would be in and through San Mateo. We're aware that's something that Samtrans is considering and has evaluated. We certainly want to position the city to be supportive of those efforts. And we also recognize that Caltrain service to some parts of the city could be improved, greater frequency, particularly to the Hayward Park Station, to the extent that that is feasible. So we want to propose language in the updated climate action plan that would support improved Caltrain frequency. There is an existing measure in the climate action plan about public shuttles. Mostly those are intended as last mile shuttles to and from the Caltrain stations. We think with some of the technology that has emerged over the past few years, there's an opportunity to add new language to this measure, looking at microtransit services that would provide linkages between key job and housing centers, as well as key transit hubs like the Caltrain stations. And there are certainly lots of opportunities for new and emerging technologies, electric vehicles and autonomous vehicles to be deployed as a part of this action. The city has existing climate action plan language around transportation demand management, TDM. That program has been quite successful, and we certainly want to continue it. We're looking at opportunities to expand it and make it even more effective. We want to look at expansion of carpool options for people who live and people who work in San Mateo, making that a more viable option, especially for commuting, than it currently is. We also would like to put language in the updated climate action plan around encouraging existing employers to participate in the TDM programs. TDM is required for a lot of new development that goes in. They have to meet various trip reduction standards that are required by the city, but existing employers aren't bound by those same agreements. So if there are ways to get them to participate in TDM programs and to reduce the on-road traffic from their commuting employees every day, we think that would have pretty significant greenhouse gas reduction efforts. We want to continue to increase bike mode share in the city. There's been action taken recently around shared mobility. The shared mobility space has certainly evolved quite a bit since the climate action plan was first adopted. So we want to continue to provide shared mobility options, especially for those last mile connections for residents and commuters alike, so making sure that it's accessible to people who live and work in San Mateo. We would like to expand recycling service to the extent that it is feasible. The types of materials that are accepted in recycling bins is driven, as I'm sure many of the commissioners are aware, by the economics and by what materials a recycler can get a reasonable rate of return for. So we wouldn't want to dictate any of those materials, but we would certainly want to encourage the city and its waste haulers to expand recycling programs to accommodate additional types of materials as the economic conditions allow and would make collection of additional materials feasible. We also are proposing some new language around waste awareness and source reduction, and this takes a few different forms. Certainly part of that would be working with partners in the city and in the region to establish a source reduction program, which would be all about finding ways of preventing people from throwing material away in the first place. So certainly when people do throw away materials, we want those materials to be diverted to a recycling or to a composting program. But if there are ways that people don't have to throw the material away in the first place, that is even better. We'd like to look at establishing a materials reuse program. There's a couple different forms this could take, wherein if people had unwanted materials or devices or supplies if there's a way for them to easily make those available to other people who might be able to find a use for them. We'd like to explore a ban on all forms of single-use plastic to the extent it's feasible. Certainly, the city and the state have taken action to reduce some forms of single-use plastic. There are other forms out there that the city may wish to cut back on the use of. And we would also like to encourage the city to work with its waste haulers to minimize recycling contamination. There is certainly a challenge around people putting materials in recycling bins where it doesn't necessarily belong. It contaminates the waste and makes it less likely or impossible in some cases for it to be effectively recycled. So if there are ways to minimize that contamination around educational and outreach campaigns, that is certainly something that we would want to support through the Climate Action Plan. Lastly, we have a measure around a new measure around water efficiency in new constructions, requiring new developments, both residential and non-residential, to meet the what are currently voluntary indoor and outdoor water efficiency standards that are in the California Green Building Standards Code. So right now, the state provides an optional tier of water efficiency for new construction. And we are proposing that the city could make those tiers and those efficiency standards mandatory for new construction. So we recognize that was quite a bit of material. There will certainly be time to dive into it and to ask questions. Moving on from this meeting, we plan to update that list of proposed new and revised measures, taking into account any feedback from the commission tonight, as well as any future feedback. We want to continue to engage stakeholders in the city, and there are some upcoming events next month that will seek to improve that. Once we have kind of that confirmed list of proposed new and revised measures, we really need to dig in, do the math, run the calculations, and identify the greenhouse gas reductions from these measures, making sure that they can hit the city's greenhouse gas reduction targets. And as a last step, we will update the CAP document itself and bring it to the commission and to the city council for approval. Moving forward, we have a June 6th community workshop at the main library where we will be discussing the CAP update with members of the public. We also will be presenting the draft reduction measures that we presented to you, getting some community feedback on their thoughts about these measures and how they might be improved. We'll come back to you on July 10th to present the updates from that community workshop and to really finalize the greenhouse gas reduction measures and the implementation program associated with it. Then we will be back again at the October 19th meeting to review the draft updated CAP document and to work with you to issue a recommendation on that document to the City Council. So thank you very much for your time, and with that, we'll take questions.
Thank you very much. First, do we have a bunch of slips from the public? I'm just curious.
No, I don't have any.
We don't. I see one coming down. Since we don't have a large quantity, we'll do what we did last time, which is questions and comments, and people can follow up. But I'm sorry? Well, I'm actually going to start at this end. Our brand new commissioner. Jackie, go forth.
Thank you so much. My question was related to, and I connected with Andrea about this previously, but it was about considering incentives to hire local residents in San Mateo. So are there any measures, or have you considered measures for employers in San Mateo to hire local San Mateo residents to decrease trips and vehicle miles traveled?
We haven't looked specifically at that particular strategy. We want to try and make it easier for people to travel in forms other than a single occupancy vehicle, regardless of where they're coming from. I think that is something that could be explored if the commission and the staff are interested in. It's also something that we would want to make sure is consistent with any land use, transportation, and economic policies that are that will be developed as part of the general plan update. We certainly want to make sure that these two documents are in sync.
And just to further add to that, I think it is something that could be folded into a transportation demand measure as well. So it could be part of a transportation demand management program for employers, probably less so for the residential side, but absolutely.
Thank you. And then I think that was it for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Susan?
Just something on the dates. All in all, by the way, I thought this was very good. I want to thank you and Andrea and staff. I liked the new measures. But I did see that there is an October 19th where we're going to get the final review and make a recommendation. I think that we discussed last meeting, but you folks weren't there, right, Kathy?
So yes, so we do have that sort of as a tentative schedule, and we can sort of, we don't have a date certain where we have to have this plan adopted. So if the commission decides that they want 2 meetings to discuss the drop cap like text document, we can certainly do that. That's not a big deal.
Sure, right.
to
We can have
accommodate.
the final presented to us in October and possibly then recommendations or any changes in November or something.
Yeah, absolutely. And we can maybe see based on
Right.
what you get in October, and if we have some advanced lead time, whether you feel like
Right.
you're ready to do it then or not.
Okay, all right, all right. Let's see, something that if I was to look at, like I said, all in all, I think the measures are very good. I'm going to actually keep my comments brief because I'm going to attend the public meeting. I want to hear what the public has to say. But I do know that there's members of the public who are very interested in understanding or managing the greenhouse gas emissions from gas-powered lawn equipment. And that's something that the city could control in working with PCE and/or the Bay Area Air Quality District Management. And my understanding is both those organizations are looking at possibly some sort of exchange program where a gardener would exchange his or her gas-powered leaf blower initially with a electric. And so I might want to consider possibly a metric or discussion of a metric in terms of the city kind of piggybacking off of that effort. They can't drive it, but they can through education. And I also understand in our city to do landscaping, and somebody correct me, Kathy, you might know this, but do you need to register or is there a business permit to do landscaping in the city? Do you know?
If you are a commercial gardener, so
Yeah.
if you're being paid to do it, then you are required to have a business permit.
Okay, so that would be an opportunity to possibly even do an exchange. That's a great opportunity to do an exchange as well as education. And likewise, those that we have, the city has registered, they have their contact information and can reach out to them, most likely through post, a postcard or something about this exchange program that's being offered by these agencies. So that would be something I would consider adding. And it's something that the city can affect, but needs to work with partners to get that done.
And I would recommend that be in addition to, there is an existing measure in the Climate Action Plan that is recommended to be updated, which is OR1, which is the second to last on Table 2.
On Table 2?
Which is an alternative fuel lawn and garden equipment. So these recommendations can fall under updates to the text of OR2.
Oh, good, super. Okay, good. And then I just want to talk a little bit about chargers.
OR1.
Yeah, okay, great. Thank you, Kathy. That's a good way to capture that. Regarding chargers, I would, because we really want to promote electric vehicles and what can the city do, I would like to see something of incentivize chargers at existing buildings. I know we've got new buildings, but the bottom line is most of our buildings are existing. And so if we could do something on incentivizing chargers and particularly have them battery storage ready. I know we talked about that at, I believe it was the March meeting. Also on EV vehicles, something I think the city could do is possibly offer those free parking. It could be a temporary program that might go on for maybe 2 or 3 years. And possibly, and I know Commissioner Robbins brought this up is possibly residential parking, preferred residential parking for EV. So I'm just thinking of what can the city do to encourage the adoption of EV vehicles. So residential parking, free downtown parking, chargers, battery storage. Thank you.
And I'll chime in because I don't have much, and it levers off that. On the chart that we got, by the way, thank you, this is great stuff. The chart we got tracks with what you've put on the screen, but it's item number 11. It's an existing measure on the new chart, but it is encourage the expansion of EV charging infrastructure in existing buildings. And Susan's totally right. And we have a lot. We tend to hear from single-family residents, but we have a lot of multi-unit buildings in this city. And renters don't have a lot of leverage, which is a whole nother issue. But I'm just curious what we could do and what thoughts you've got. I mean, you've got terms like leverage and encourage, but what can we do specifically to get EV chargers into those buildings, which would allow, would certainly incentivize, but basically would allow those residents to have electric vehicles? Because a single-family home, you can make the decision, even if you just plug it into an old-fashioned plug. In a multi-unit, what are you going to do? So do you have some thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, there certainly are options that the city has to install EV chargers in those existing residential multifamily units. And I know there are some other communities that have either partially or completely subsidized the cost of purchasing and installing those chargers. So at that point, it becomes a net benefit for the landlord because they don't have to pay anything or they pay very little, but they can now offer an increased amenity. So that is certainly something that can be used for rental units. As far as a multifamily that is owned, I think there are perhaps similar approaches that could be taken. If the city does want to incentivize those chargers and publicizes the availability of an incentive program, that is probably something that could go quite a long way. There might also be opportunities to work with developers or work with property owners if they do any major retrofits to their buildings. If the building was of a certain size or had a certain number of units, that would provide another avenue when the building permit is issued for the city to work with them to get any electric vehicle chargers installed. So I think we can certainly provide some more language in these strategies around that topic.
Yeah, because I think at some point in the fall, when we're going to be making recommendations up to council, the more specifics, the better, and particularly examples. Right now, I would hate to try and, I can't speak for the council, but I'd hate to be trying to corral 3 votes for a subsidy program without, real dollars and examples from other cities where it's worked, and hopefully at the lowest cost possible, but still has the net result. Andrea, you wanted to?
I approached so that I could comment on this topic. I think electric vehicle charging in multifamily is extremely important. And what Eli mentioned are all types of approaches that would fall under this broad category. So we do have time to kind of hone in and talk about the exact approaches that we would implement if this were part of our new climate action plan. But I think one of them is definitely partnering and home property owner outreach to provide the resources and support needed to enable installation in multifamily buildings.
Okay, thanks. One other question I had, unrelated, but it's on the list. This Samtrans Express bus that they're talking about, it's out of our control a little bit, but do we have an idea of where they're thinking of connecting here in San Mateo and where they would go in San Francisco? Do we have any idea of their pilot project?
The express bus is along El Camino, which is what has been proposed. And, the city does play a role in implementation of bus rapid transit in terms of there's a lot of interaction with our right-of-way and sidewalks and stops. So it does become quite a partnership whenever these projects are implemented.
Okay, but have they gotten to the point where they're identifying where in the city they would like to stop? on this
I
end?
am. I
And
don't
then
know
where in
if-
the big city they would like to end up?
If Brad is have more details on that, I mean, I do know again which corridor it is. I don't know if the specific stops on that corridor have been identified. They are running already express bus service, which I have seen in action running up and down the corridor, which is sort of a level before BRT.
Yeah, and I'm actually not familiar with the exact stops they take right now. I can probably get that information to you if you'd like.
That'd be great. I'm just curious, as to, efficacy would depend a lot on where it's going from and to, and being part of a family that does commute into the city some, I'd be curious to see how that plays out. That's it for me. Raphael?
Through the chair, if you don't mind. So
Sure,
I do
Kathy.
also want to point out that what we're looking at tonight are sort of the high-level umbrella. So when we, for example, when we're talking about encouraging EV chargers, the actual climate action plan, when you get the draft, will go into a little bit more specifics with some recommendations of approaches. So just keep that in mind that by the time we get there, that we will have a little bit more detail.
Values, goals, policies.
Like and also when the council does adopt the climate action plan, at that point they're still adopting a suggested list of strategies. So it doesn't mean that at that point they're adopting actually moving forward with any one of those strategies. Those all then continue to come back through this commission and through the council, much like the building reach codes, which is mentioned here as a strategy, which we're already quite a few steps down the path of putting in place. Like I think it was the very first slides on building electrification incentives and some of the mandatory EV installations.
Thank you. Thank you. Raphael?
Great. Folks will be surprised to see that I have a few comments. Thanks for all your important work on this. The first question I have is in relation to the target. So if you could cycle back to that slide, and I should know the answer to this, but can you refresh my memory on where these targets come from, the 2030 and the 2050 target?
So these are consistent with the targets that the state has laid out through legislation and through their own goals. These are not yet targets necessarily that have been formally included in the climate action plan. These are just, we're demonstrating consistency with the path that the state is on. The 2020 target is 15% below the 2005 baseline. The 2030 target is 40% below that 2020 target. That is consistent with the Senate Bill 32 that the state adopted a few years ago. The 2050 target is 80% below the 2020 target, and that's consistent with some of the state's long-term goals, but it has not yet been formally codified into law.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so the cities actually could choose to set different, perhaps more aggressive targets.
The city does have that option, yes.
Okay, so that might be a point worthy of subsequent discussion. Certainly that would be something that I would be interested in looking at. Then, let's see, the list of updated measures that are in the staff report, I assume that the updated measures are consistent with the discussion that we had back in March, because I didn't try to reconcile that with that discussion.
Yes, the only exception is to measure RE2, which we had previously proposed removing. That was the one that deals with community choice aggregation.
And I'm sorry, you did make that comment already. Okay, thank you. Then digging into some of the specific measures, one point of information that may be useful for other commissioners, putting my Peninsula Clean Energy hat on, and that is that Peninsula Clean Energy will be rolling out an electric vehicle charging infrastructure incentive program for existing buildings, and that's coming later this year. So I know that staff will keep the commission informed on that, but I'm happy to circulate some information if desired. With regards to EV charging in existing buildings, one point that has been suggested in some forums is exploring whether the seismic retrofits of existing multi-unit dwellings might be a trigger point worth exploring. Now, I understand that this is extremely sensitive for a variety of reasons, but it may be interesting to explore that if there's a lightweight method of making EV charging easier at that point in time, such as inclusion of conduits or something on that order. So not the full electrical layout, panel upgrades and everything else, but if we could just do that, that might substantially ease subsequent deployment. As I understand it, there's a lot of sensitivity around the seismic retrofit in that, property owners might then just convert it and sell the property and do other things if they feel it's too onerous. But nevertheless, it does seem like a good opportunity to at least explore if that might be a trigger point for increasing EV readiness. The second item, and we discussed this a little bit around new construction. Can we refine that language to make explicit that this is about increasing EV charging in new construction above state levels? Because otherwise, it may not be clear to most folks. Then moving on the city clean energy vehicles, I noted that there's compressed natural gas as one of the proposed options here. My impression from past discussions from staff is that compressed natural gas is increasingly difficult to find for use since we already have some natural gas off of the wastewater treatment plant capital project. Is that not correct?
It has been challenging. We have fairly recently started to put some compressed natural gas vehicles into service, and it is actually a very nice, it goes hand in hand in some ways with the electric vehicles, because right now some of the more heavy duty vehicles that are like public works staff uses, like the big trucks that do the hard work, there's not a lot of EV options for those. So it is a good alternative, and those are the ones we've been focusing more on our fleet in having retrofitting to compressed natural gas.
That makes sense. So what we may want to consider is just refining the language to make that a little bit clearer, because on light duty, probably electric is probably the way to go, but certainly on heavy duty, that makes a lot of sense. Let's see. I guess I'm supposed to be focusing on questions, not comments. I'm curious if there has been any exploration on measures to help electrify ride hailing, which is a major source of vehicle miles traveled in the city.
You're referring to services like Uber and Lyft?
That's correct.
I believe there was some discussion around what the city can do for those types of services, and I think it's something that's still being determined, but it's unclear if the city has a great deal of leverage or a great deal of ability to influence the way those services operate.
So I'll come back to that, because there may be some avenues, and we've got some other measures in here that kind of fall into, I would think, similar areas, but certainly other cities are taking measures around the ride-hailing services, and there could be policy avenues there to explore. One other question is whether we have considered or could consider city policy positions to be included in the climate action plan. So there are things that we, have as objectives, such as, increasing recycling and so on and so forth. If we had state policies around extended producer responsibility, for example, which has been previously mentioned in past commission meetings, the city doesn't have direct leverage over that as a policy, but could certainly take a policy position which, could inform League of Cities and so forth to take such positions. This is hasn't previously, I believe, been done in climate action plans, but I would like to float it to see if that's something that could be explored.
We can certainly look into that. I mean, the main intention of this climate action plan is to be a civic roadmap for the city of San Mateo in our climate reductions. And so we have tried to, sort of related to both of your comments, limit it to the things of where we can partner or we have some sphere of influence. So while some cities have some ability to regulate TNCs, for example, San Francisco being a city and county, we don't have that same ability. I think they're regulated more, if they're regulated, I'm not sure about that, more countywide, because we can't really control the cross flow across borders in the same way. So some of those things just become more challenging when they're, especially also the broader policy things.
Right.
As we have to report on our implementation and success every year also.
Understood. Okay, I think that's it for now.
Great.
Eli, Sarah, thank you, Andrea and staff. It's great stuff. It's all great. But it's a wish list from the top down that you can implement 100 programs. And if the goal is to lower the greenhouse gas and do that and get the biggest bang for the buck, we can come up with 1,000 things, which was the original sustainability issue. We can come up with 1,000 different programs if we had the cost. If the cities were just filled with monies to say, hey, we can develop each and every program, take the time, and go out and get it. And we never had that opportunity because you have to get the most you can with what you have. Because you have that cost outlay of time, energy, staff to develop programs and then make them work. If they don't work and they're only doing a little reduction versus a big bang, we have to work on the big bang because that's what we have. That was one of our biggest things. And if we're dealing with traffic was one of our biggest things, we have to focus maybe on getting housing for police, fire, city employees here and develop programs like our newest commissioner was developing. We were discussing it in the past that any new developments in the city, how do you get the planning, city council, and development to all agree on housing for their employees? And it hasn't worked well in this town so far. But it would be something great because that's a big bang for your buck on it. We need the numbers that come into play here. If you have a lot of little items that you're just saying, well, we can incentive and mandate, doesn't mean anything if they're very small numbers to that big number and you don't get there. If you come up with 40 items that one takes over the 40, you work on the one, not the 40. Even though it's great, but it goes back to cost, time, energy. Incentives, as Commissioner Raphael was saying, regarding clean energy, PG&E. Even developing programs in the past that would be a discussion of how do you advertise EV spaces from big companies who want that advertisement to pay for it. Developing projects that the city doesn't have the cost always makes it easier to pay for those projects because then you can work on them a lot more if you have companies, Google, big companies coming in who want to say, hold it, we want to see our name in places. We want to advertise. Get the little companies, even like Lime Bike, which is not just bikes, it's scooters, and they want all this issues too. So it's the advertising, it all adds up. You were talking about point of sale. That always becomes an issue where we've always had a problem in the town here where the realtors all will fight. And that doesn't help because that's a big fight a lot. It's needed on a lot of items, but it doesn't mean you always win. So that's a big fight. So that's basically, it's just trying to find out that crossover between the planning division for development, city council, and public works, and what will work versus what the state comes out right behind and says, hold it, we're going to mandate it, or we're going to force this issue. because we don't want to be ahead of the curve and spending money that we don't have to have the state come out and change something in a year, but we'd also want to be on top with the state if they're coming out with it, to be right on a step ahead of them if it works for our companies or our development of our city here, because we want to be a leader, not a follower as much. That's my opinion.
Thank you. Public comment.
Drew?
Thank you.
Good evening, everyone, again. I apologize, I missed the beginning part of this presentation, so if somehow what I say is screwed up relative to that, I apologize. So, a couple things with this. I think there should be more than one community meeting, potentially. I just looked at my calendar. I don't know what time on the 6th that'll be, but I have 2 different meetings I have to attend, so it just seems this is a big thing. There should be some more options there. So part of this, like in a theme of some other areas that I've been working on, is disaster mitigation. So greenhouse gas emissions and different things, get rid of gas. And it's like, okay, disasters happen. What do we do for those few days when stuff happens? And I'm not talking just earthquake. The wildfires, I've been in meetings, PG&E has promised they're going to take down their lines for 2 to 5 days and inspect every single thing. So if a transmission line that's critical to our power goes down for no reason locally, we'll be out of power. And so I think part of these goals need to, I see bigger wins as blending the goals to that also accomplish making us more resilient to just life and the things about life. And that's something that I would like to see here. And related to that is land use planning and some stuff like, the Caltrain example is great. Everyone's like, be near Caltrain, be near this, bus rapid transit and stuff. We need to build in land use planning, and this can be part of that reserves certain capacity. Like, we need to make sure there's enough space for Caltrain to widen the tracks. Like, in their business plan, the downtown station will have less service relative to other stations because they can't widen through that station because it was built too tight. And just getting grades up through there will be brutal. So some of this is, how does climate action also guide some land use to reserve the capacity for 20 years from now, 30 years from now, 40 years from now? And like on bus rapid transit or the express buses, Samtrans is looking at 6 to 8 different routes. And some of those routes touch San Mateo, some go on 280. And so, more down on a real practical, as a homeowner here and stuff, multifamily dwellings. Like I have interest in that because of my past in apartment and my spouse's condo. It's not just the installation, it's the billing side. Like in the condo side, you have assigned parking spots, you have a meter and a panel that's in your unit, and to run the wires from the main panel in the building to your unit back down to the parking garage, like there's a bunch of just logistics that need to be thought through. The concept is, hey, installation, but it's not. There's a whole billing side that has to be dealt with. Same way in apartments, and my time's up. I could speak more. Thank you.
Thank you, Drew. Any others?
That's all I have.
That's it. I'll bring it back to the commission and ask, given the time, if y'all could be brief. If there's anything new or follow-up, that'd be great. Does anybody have anything they want to add? Start back down. Jackie, go for it.
To a couple points that Commissioner Clare made, it would be great to see some iteration of this table with staff time. Also, I know that was previously done in other iterations of this table, but it would be great to see what the staff time would be against some of these measures. Also, related to measures 15 and 16 for improved public transit service, also looking at improved public transit infrastructure related to bus stops. So making sure, looking at bus stops and seeing how they are to encourage more participation in riding buses, because some of the bus stops around San Mateo aren't don't facilitate that. I'm not sure what the role of the city would be in looking at that. And then in terms of outreach for the community workshops, it'd be great to see, creative strategies to reach a broader audience also in those workshops, and also seeing more potential for additional workshops, maybe 2 or 3. And then lastly, also related to adaptation and resiliency. So I'm aware that this plan is related to mitigation, but going further and seeing how we can incorporate measures of adaptation and resiliency in a future iteration of this plan would be wonderful.
Thank you. Susan, anything further?
Actually, I think Jackie brings up an interesting point. You know, if I was to look at this, and I know this started all the way back in 25, I would call this a greenhouse gas reduction plan. And then the climate action plan goes back to resiliency and disaster planning, really. But anyway, not to get into semantics there. I think just a couple of things. I think Drew brought up a very good point, not necessarily greenhouse gas reduction directly, but it is something the city could affect, and it has to do with land use, is building enough, what we'll say, space to allow for the expansion or the installation of bike paths for scooters and bikes, sidewalks, rail, road installations. And I say that within the context of there's a build frenzy. And so I think I just want to kind of touch on that because I thought that was a very good idea. And it does really, it's not a greenhouse gas reduction strategy, but it facilitates the reduction through bike paths, pedestrian, road expansions, rail expansions, and whatnot. So no, I like I said, all in all, I thought it was a good first cut. Thank you. Thank you, Andrea. I think she's here. And I look forward to the neighborhood meeting on the 6th. And, you know, if it's a possibility or consideration to do another meeting, I support that as well. Thanks.
Thank you. Anything further, Raphael?
Yeah, a couple follow-ups. Thank you. Coming back to the transportation network companies, a couple areas that we may want to explore would include if there is a franchise agreement that's put in place or could be put in place, that might be a mechanism to encourage electrification. Parking and curb access is extremely important to ride-hailing services. Fast charge siting and access, so increasingly transportation network companies are looking for dedicated fast chargers for electric TNC drivers, and then potentially negotiations with SFO around electrification. And we have huge quantity of traffic that is just, residential to SFO and back. And so if we can electrify that, that would be a very big deal. Another item on transportation demand management, it would be great if TDM plans could start to make explicit support for electrification. So on the shuttles and other services that are part of the supporting process for TDM, it would seem like there would be potentially a vehicle to start to encourage electrification. With regards to the item that I proposed earlier on policy positions, perhaps rather than a measure per se, what the climate action plan could include is a dedicated section on key enabling policies that are perhaps state or other agency policies that would significantly advance our objectives. That could be a vehicle to call those out, and then the city could, of course, make a decision about how best to act on those through whatever vehicles are appropriate. On single-use plastics, I want to just flag that bioplastics are growing significantly, and we might want to give a little bit of thought to what the climate action plan potentially might want to say about bioplastics as an alternative if we're going to talk about plastics. And a couple last items on bike share. I want to make sure everywhere we're talking about bikes, we're also talking about scooters. And if we could make that explicit, I think that would probably be a good thing, given that there's a growing interest in that. And then the last item, and this is a total way out there sort of thing for a climate action plan. And that is, I don't have a lot of clarity for myself on how much property that's open space property that the city has, but are there any vehicles to start to consider sequestration strategies? So carbon negative strategies. Those are things that certainly the county would be appropriate for, but we may want to just start thinking about that because those things will be coming down the pike, and we might want to start thinking about them sooner rather than later. So thank you for all your work on this.
Greg, anything further? Nope. Thank you. Thank you all very much. We'll go on to reports and announcements. What do we have from staff?
Yeah.
Mr. Underwood.
Thank you, Chair Robbins. I gave you all one of these announcements. I think you received it on email prior. If any of you can make it out to the 2019 Family Fun Ride and Bike Rodeo, they'll be out at Carledge Park Elementary School this Saturday from 10 to noon.
And I just wanted to give you all an update on some items that went forward this Monday night at City Council. So first of all, Andrea and Sue Ellen brought forward the shared mobility program that had gone to this commission in March. It was March, yes. So the council, we did bring forward the commission's recommendation to move forward sooner with e-scooters. The council has decided at this point to stick with the initial staff recommendation where they're adopting the framework that we discussed, starting out with a bike share permit and reserving the option in the future to look towards e-scooters, but just aren't feeling at this point that they're ready to dip their toe in that water yet. In addition, after their presentation here, Cal Water did present as the study session item to the council, and I think it was disappointing, I will say, at the last meeting that they weren't very prepared to answer some of the questions that were brought up before them. They did do a much better job at incorporating a lot of the questions and issues that came up at this commission in their PowerPoint and in their presentation. I'm happy to send the PowerPoint. I also might recommend that anyone who's interested watch the video. The council did decide to send a letter, but the letter, based on the presentation, is really saying we're supportive of the efforts Cal Water is currently doing, and we want to encourage the CPUC to allow for the rate increases and to, in general, push forward for additional rate increases in the future to further fund things like sustainability, system reliability, reduction in leakage, and it's still very much in the vein of a lot of the issues that were discussed here. But Cal Water did do a better job of explaining how they are covering those issues in their current plans.
Thank you. Mr. Underwood.
Chair Robbins, if I could, Kathy reminded me I should share something with you that happened at the council meeting as well. The first guaranteed maximum price package for the wastewater treatment plant construction was awarded. So a great big effort by the Public Works team and others. So we're really happy to see that moving forward.
Excellent.
One last announcement.
Ms. Chow.
Bike to Work Day is tomorrow. So if you're considering biking to work, don't forget, I will be here at City Hall at 7 in case you want to stop by my Energizer station, but there are Energizer stations throughout the county if this one is not convenient for you. And if you take any type of alternative transit, you can log that through commute.org and check out their cool prizes that they're giving away to anyone who commutes in San Mateo County and takes advantage of an alternative commute this month in May.
Thank you. I don't think we all have the crystal ball. We've seen it. I don't think we need to review it. Nothing further. I think we are ready to adjourn.
If I may just make one comment.
I don't know. Go ahead.
Cliff. So I noticed that the Clean Water Plan is on the crystal ball, and there's been quite a bit of discussion around water issues, and I just wanted to encourage staff to make this agenda item one that will allow some flexibility to get into some of the water issues that maybe have not been fully discussed, water efficiency and the like. So, because it might be an opportunity to address some of the questions that we've gotten from the community.
Thank you. Good. Adjourned.